Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Nia Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And that's a perfect segue to today's guest, which is Nia King-Rubie. Hello, Nia.
Hi.
How are you?
I am good. I'm so excited to be here. I loved our first conversation, and I'm just really excited to be having this conversation with you here today.
I'm very excited to have you here as well, because when we talked, I need to have Nia as a guest on this podcast because you're all about systems. And you are such a great example of an entrepreneur. And let me introduce you. So give our listeners a little bit of context of what we're going to talk about and who you are. So I'm going to give the bio, but then I'm going to ask you to tell your story, because it's always great when you tell your own story, right? So you are basically you bring over a decade of experience in advising top brands. And we're talking about top brands, we're talking NFL, we're talking Google, we're talking real top brands, right? And you founded Immersive Strategies in 2019. But before that, you served as the vice president of strategic communications for the Glover Park Group, Google's national policy influencer engagement leads, White House advanced associate, and deputy director for the 2012 Democratic National Convention Committee. So, you've done some things here and there, right? We might say. You're a true entrepreneur. You have the passion, for success. You also volunteer and help others succeed, right? And in terms of, people probably ask, what is Immersive Strategies? So you are a strategic engagement firm for the digital age, right? So tell us more about what does that mean? What is a strategic engagement firm for the digital age?
Definitely. Great place to start. And I'd love to kind of zoom back a little bit in how the company was founded to help answer that question.
Sure.
So I, in 2012, worked on the convention committee, the Obama's re-election campaign, the presidential inaugural committee, and was fascinated by how the campaign used digital to engage on a mass level, right? And it just was so emblematic of this shift. And it's like, if you are not engaging people through digital and in a deeper and customizable way, right? Like, I think that's one of the really extraordinary things that have been achieved through digital campaigns is how targeted you can be. So I kind of took that concept and was like, wow, there's something really powerful and interesting here. And after went on to work at Google to really kind of dig into this, right? Like, tech is the wave, it is taking over everything. How do we understand how you engage people and engage audiences through this kind of spark of an idea, but really dig deep into the tech side? And with that experience and really looking to engage essentially elected officials, and I think that all of us have probably seen snippets of the hearings with the tech industry and just how disconnected some older elected officials are with what is happening in tech. So my job is to really help translate a lot of these very complex tech issues to legislators, to thought leaders who might not understand it in a deep way. And in that process, I found that there was a disconnect between what traditional PR firms were looking to do and the tactics that they were looking to do in order to translate these complex issues, and what Google as a company and me as an individual really needed to do in order to translate these issues. And not only are they complex, but they're also thorny. When you look at, for instance, a self-driving car and somebody trusting their grandmother to be in a self-driving car or their child to be in a self-driving car, these are real life issues with some really big implications. And what I found is you have to bring the stories to life in a deep and meaningful way for people to really understand it. It is not about the code in the self-driving cars that will help tell the story of why it's important. It is about the person who is blind being able to have a sense of independence by using a self-driving car to get around. That was kind of the spark of this idea. Like, we really need to have a firm, and we're looking for firms who can really double down on how you can have deeper levels of engagement on the issues that these top brands care about. And not only that, but how are you actively engaging thought leaders and policymakers and large brands in a space to help tell some of these narratives that are really shaping the future? So it was kind of through this experience that Immersive Strategies is born, and that is the core of what we do. We help larger brands, we help thought leaders, and we help government entities all connect with each other in meaningful ways. And we do that through crafting events and experiences. And with that, having strategic communications campaigns, which run across digital as well as traditional media, to really holistically bring these groups together and tell these impactful stories.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you give us an example of a case study or an example of a project that you have done that will demonstrate that?
Definitely. I will take the work that we did with the state of New York and the governor there. So they have a program that is called the MWBE program. So it's the Women and Minority Owned Business program, in which they help businesses in New York State really take advantage of government opportunities. And they wanted to bring these groups together to kind of educate them and bring them together with the heads of all of these large agencies in New York. And you think about like New York State, it's almost operating like a small country, like with how much money is kind of flowing around. So they brought us in to help with how they're engaging these key groups, how they're bringing large brands and large companies to the table, how they're bringing agencies and authorities to the table, how they're bringing as well elected officials to the table to help and support these businesses. And at the time in which we were doing it, it was kind of at the height of COVID. So a lot of these businesses were failing. This was literally a time of life or death for them. So we came in to help not only produce this forum and really be thoughtful about the content there, really be thoughtful about who's delivering the content there, understanding what the issues are with these businesses, to help the government and elected officials engage with these businesses in a deeper way, as well as provide these businesses with the tools that they need to navigate and survive. Because New York State smartly realized that these businesses are critical to the economic recovery. They are the businesses that are driving jobs in the state. They are the thing that's going to really keep the economy afloat. So they really had to invest in them. So we did that through having kind of a traditional messaging campaign, an email marketing campaign, getting the word out to these businesses to let them know that there's this program available, using traditional media outlets to really get the word out, as well as having a robust digital campaign as well, to kind of really capture the attention, leverage partners to also help tap into their social media following to really get the word out there around all of the content, and then kind of culminating in this 3-day forum that we had, in which the governor was there. We did this project with the state of New York actually 2 years in a row, and we've seen it really grow and develop. And we had to adapt it to the changing needs of the business, because businesses' needs during COVID were very different even the following year, just a year later. So it's really, how are we adapting? How are we helping these three groups really forge connections to create a supportive environment so that these businesses can grow and thrive?
That's beautiful. Wow. And what a great cause too. That's incredible. So, you are working with the bigger brands. You're also volunteering and as an or volunteering, also working as an advisor for smaller companies, right, to help them grow and scale. How would you apply those communication skills or those communication strategies, right, or the engagement strategies that you use for the bigger firms or the state of New York or the NFL or whatnot? What will be your advice of key points that businesses that are smaller, medium-sized, then we're not talking about the big, the Fortune 100 companies, but the smaller ones, what can they learn from it? Like what similarities can you apply also if you're a smaller business in order to actually have a strategic engagement? Because it's all about creating the strategy, right? Not just throwing words out there or images or marketing, but you actually want to be strategic because there is so much noise out there that if you want to stand out and if you want people to actually listen to your message, you have to be strategic.
Yes, definitely. And it's actually really interesting. Some of the same challenges and things that some of these large brands that we work with, like Apple, the NFL, and Google have with engaging on a deeper level are some of the same challenges that I found with some of the small businesses that I mentor or serve as a business advisor for. And that really has to do with changing dynamics with how people want to be engaged with. Nobody wants to be another number. Everybody wants to feel like you are talking to them, not that you are talking to a large group. So it is, how are we able to customize and target messaging, make it authentic, and also try to segment groups as much as possible to create that feeling that you are talking to me specifically, not that you are talking to, for instance, so I am based in Washington, D.C., not that you are talking to all small businesses in Washington, D.C., you are talking to Nia, right? And there is a big difference with how you craft that. Authenticity goes such a long way with that. And part of what we do as a company that's really critically important is really truly assimilate into the brands that we're working with, because you want it to feel authentic to Apple. You want it to feel authentic to Governor Hochul. You want it to feel authentic to the NFL. And all of these different brands have very different ways of communicating, very different styles. So I think authenticity is winning in this current climate, as well as making it as targeted as possible. And I think technology has come a long way with helping to do that. When you just think about how essentially we can send out email campaigns and it can use my name in there, right? It's not just, greetings person X, or, or greetings everybody. It's hi Nia.
Absolutely.
Does that kind of make sense? Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. This is one of the things when we go and document processes and procedures for businesses, I tell them it's not the same for everyone. We are documenting for your company. We are using your core values, your mission, your vision, and who you are. And this is the language we're going to use. So we're going to learn your language. We're going to use the way you communicate. So it will communicate to your staff, and that's the only way we'll be able to integrate it into your systems. So that's basically you're saying the same in terms of, you have to be authentic when you are communicating. So what advice would you give to businesses when they are working their own strategy in order to be authentic, but not have to, we all have a limited amount of time and attention we can spend, right? And now it's very easy to just, I'm just going to create, AI is going to create some message for me. I'm going to use AI, but you have to be careful with it, because the AI is a great tool, but it's the operator who enters the information and uses the AI. That's really important, because you still have to have the human mind and your own authenticity and your own voice directing it, right? So what are some of the advice that you can give to people that are looking to sound authentic, but still utilize some kind of an automation?
Yeah, this is really interesting, because we find ourselves in a very fine balance between how we are making ourselves very authentic, but also making it so that we can scale whatever it is that we're doing, right? Especially for small businesses. So I think you mentioned something that's really interesting, which is the use of technology, right? They're tech tools that will help you get a bit of the way there towards having an authentic message. And as a business owner and as a small business owner, even though something might not get me 100% of the way there, if it can get me at least 50% of the way there, then it's a win. So as we look at things like ChatGPT, right, and creating a message, you can essentially put in some prompts and understand that this will probably get you about 50% of the way there. And that is okay. And that is a win for most of us, right, who work in the small business arena. After that, you really have to think about how you can customize it to speak very authentically to your audience. And I think the pre-work to that is really deep diving and understanding who your target audience is. Because once you do that deep work and really understand it, creating personas, right? figuring out, okay, who is it that I'm speaking to? What is their problem? How do we uniquely solve that, right? So then you're like, okay, these are the prompts, for instance, that you can put in a chat GPT. Then after that, it's, does this sound like me, right? So chat GPT can spit out something and it's probably fairly generic. But if you know me, or if you've encountered me, or if you've seen me speaking anywhere, you can probably pick up on the fact that I did not write this, right? So I think that it is then having a scan for, how do I create this in my own voice? How do I create those authentic touch points so that the person who I've essentially sketched out in my persona, the person who is getting this message, knows that it is authentically coming from me and it is authentically for them. And I think that that is kind of the work that businesses need to do in order to figure out then how do you create those authentic messages. And the other thing that we do is, even though you might have a core message in your messaging campaign, how are you then tweaking those messages to various audiences and segments? So for instance, my goal might be to publicize the forum, right? Let's use a different example. Let's use Apple. Apple has a new product that's rolling out, and they're trying to engage deeply with thought leaders and policymakers in order to show and demonstrate that the new product that they're rolling out has really stringent privacy features on it, right? Because privacy and security is something that's really huge and a huge topic of conversation now. Even though that is my core message, the fact that we have the new iPhone Y, we're going to call it, we'll just make it up, iPhone Y is coming out. We want to showcase the privacy and security features. The messaging that I am going to send to me as a thought leader is very different from, and should be different, frankly, from the messaging that I send to member of Congress X to help them explain and understand that, and is very different from the partners that I'm going to send it to, or other brands who I want to then come in and engage that are within the Apple ecosystem. So I just wanted to use that as a point to say, even though you might have the same core messaging, you really have to dig deep into who your audience is, segment those audiences, and make sure that what you're saying is speaking in a very authentic way to them.
Right. So it's really looking at the person that you're communicating, right? When you're communicating somebody, as you said, you have to have the persona or the avatar of the person, and you're not going to communicate the same if you have different segments of the population that you are talking to. So that's very important and part of the process, absolutely. So I think that methodology or that procedure or process you just described applies to any size business. I mean, obviously,
yes,
the bigger you are, is the bigger the campaign and the strategy more complex maybe, but you can also apply it, like, let's say if you're a construction company, if you're talking to a high-end home owner that you want to do a remodel, you're going to speak differently than somebody that just want to fix her upper and just want to figure out some quick solutions, right? Or somebody
totally.
who wants to sell the house fast and they just want to repair something. It really depends on who you're talking to. But I think, to your point, when I'm listening to you, you do have to do your market research. You do have to find out what is important to that segment of the population, and I just did a podcast with John Lee where he was talking about the importance of surveys and how he can conduct surveys in order to actually see what is important to people. So you have to actually combine all of those different aspects in order to be able to know who you are talking to, right?
Definitely. And I think that you brought up a couple of really interesting points. The fact that the problems and the challenges that are facing some of these larger global brands are the same problems and challenges that are facing some of these small companies. And that is why I'm able to work across, in Apple, as well as helping a business of like 1 to 3 people scale, right? Because at its core, it's some of the same issues. Now, the scale at which you're going to implement some of these solutions are very different. How is very different. But it's been fascinating and enlightening for me to kind of understand that process in fullness, kind of as I go through a lot of the work that I do on the broad spectrum.
Absolutely. Nia, we got connected through Playbook Builder, so we're going to give them a big shout out to John LaDuca.
Yes.
I did a great 2 podcasts with him. I was on his podcast twice, or webinar twice. We collaborate. So Playbook Builder, for those of you who do not know, It's a process documentation and implementation platform or software where you can actually document your processes there, use a lot of videos, and it also allows you to send communications out to the team about the processes, make sure you can follow up who is looking at the processes and who is not. So it is like this on playbook digital playbook that is beautifully laid out, and that everybody is very accessible to your team. So we connected through Playbook Builder because you were documenting your processes, and we start talking, and I thought, wow, you really understand why processes are important for businesses, no matter what the size is, right?
Yes.
Because those are one of the key elements for growing and scaling. So why, from your viewpoint and what you experience, your vast experience working for large companies, running your own company, advising smaller companies, working with large companies, why are processes so important?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So I am a mentor with Goldman Sachs, is one of their many kind of business incubator programs, and we're on our third cohort, sorry. And one of the things that I see that is common across all of these businesses is how creating processes for operationalizing the work that they do is critical for scale. And this is no different than any large company and large brand, right? In order to scale sustainably and ensure quality control along the way, you have to have some sort of set of processes. My company is no different than that either, right? We are looking to continue to scale and continue to grow. And for me, when I look at that, our reputation is everything. We cannot grow, and we cannot grow effectively unless we are able to ensure quality every step of the way, right? And also, as one person and as, a team of X amount of people, we have to essentially relinquish control in order to grow and scale as well. And I think that in order to relinquish that control, we have to have some sort of baseline that we're all working under, baseline standard, baseline tools, so that we're making sure that, as we're continuing down this road, we're all on the same page. So that's kind of like 30,000 foot level. Then the challenge was, how do we actually do this in execution? So our business is very subjective, I would say. I have a friend of mine, shout out to Cobbs, who equated it to how are we translating grandma's recipe, right? So grandma has this great recipe for, let's say, apple pie. She's like, oh, you put just a pinch of cinnamon, you put some sugar to taste, and you're like, okay, grandma, but what is the measurement, right? Is it a cup of sugar? Is it a half a cup of sugar? And it's just like, oh, just to taste. And it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? So when we look at the work that we do, we essentially use a bunch of different tactics in order to get towards a strategic engagement campaign. But because everything is so customizable, and it has to be customized because we can't have one product that we deliver here and that same exact product for another brand. It's just not going to feel authentic, right? And we know authenticity is key. So it is, how are we translating this subjective business into something that can be operationalized and that we can roll out in order to achieve scale? So I will say that as we looked at this pre-work, right, and we talked about, digging into personas, understanding things, we had to first go through a pretty stringent process of understanding what areas of the business were profitable and what areas of the business weren't. And I think that is a humbling experience, because you're like, oh, but we started in this way and I love doing this. And it's just like, okay, well, the numbers tell a story and the numbers essentially don't lie. So once we did that, we realized, okay, these are the areas that we need to double down on because these are the most profitable. These are what clients are now telling us that they need. And this is what the market is saying that they value at the price in which we need in order to be able to produce this high level product, right? Because essentially our price has to also align with willingness to pay. Once we did all of that, we were then able to narrow down, this is the universe of things that we need to be focused in on in order to operationalize, in order to scale. So for us in our company, I'm going to use specifics. We did this whole analysis and we found that there were some areas when it came to execution that was losing money. We knew that we were best at strategy, creating and developing plans. And we had a system that we were doing intuitively and working with clients intuitively that included a discovery phase, which is a lot of that in-depth research for us to figure out how we're customizing things. And the first step was really articulating what that process was just at a 30,000 foot level. The next was this ideation phase. So it was creating these strategy roadmaps when it came to the engagement side. So we look at like digital communications, creating an event creative brief, which essentially was our guide towards the actual core event execution. Then we have the implementation phase. And we realized that the implementation phase was where we were losing all the money. And it was also in which the phase in which we can engage partners to help us execute at a high level. So for instance, we can only service X amount of events with our core team per month. But if we're trying to scale exponentially, let's say, we need partners to help us with the execution phase of things, because that is what's hindering us from growth. So then it said, okay, how do we then create tools to then look at the discovery phase, operationalize it, create some tools there so that we can extract the information that we need, do this research. Then how are we looking at it in the ideation phase? So how can we operationalize the creation of this event creative brief, the creation of this engagement roadmap? How are we then creating parameters? How are we then providing people with examples so they understand exactly what this output should look like? And it's a really fine balance, again, between making sure that we are providing parameters, standards, and tools versus being too overly prescriptive so that something that we're producing for one client feels the same way. And then we also had to then look at how are we providing tools for our partners? If we know that scale is important for in the implementation phase, right? We essentially have to look at creating tools and policies and procedures and operationalizing things, not just for us internally, but also for our partners. So how are we balancing between the fact that partner X might have their own way of doing things, but we have our way of doing things, and allowing enough wiggle room in the process for how our expert partner, and we're engaging them because they're an expert partner, would like to do things. So it's been a very interesting dance, we'll say, between, you know, how are we essentially downloading years of experience where people are just doing things intuitively and just kind of moving along, to how we're documenting the process that our company internally is doing intuitively. And then how are we kind of pulling in our partners and creating SOPs that will help but not stifle our partners.
That's beautiful. That's beautifully said. You know, because I run into it all the time. I mean, that's where we work with companies to document, right? So the main concerns that companies have is like, how am I ever going to make this into a process? Can it be a process? Well, you know what, if you're repeating it, if you're doing it, even if you repeat it once a year, it's still a process because you go through a sequence of steps. The thing is that you might not be thinking about it this way, but it is, because if you want to get to a final outcome, there will be steps that will take you from step A to B, you know, from step A to step B, right? With everything in between, or A to Z and everything in between. Otherwise, you will just snap your fingers and it will happen. If it doesn't, those sequence of actions are a process. And as you said, like when you're in the service industry, when you're providing something that's subjective, as you called it, it's harder. Yes, but it still exists, and it's a matter of developing that art, developing that technology, developing what you're doing. That's the only way you will be able to scale. But I think you also brought such a wonderful point in terms of the collaboration with others. You know, even in the construction industry, and you would say, well, construction, we can write processes because there is a way that how you actually create the estimate. You do this, and that, right? You do an inspection, you do this, you do that, and you create it. But there is also working, let's say, with subcontractors. Creating those expectations and documenting it and having it in writing is so important, so you can actually have that harmony and that collaboration. And that's very important. And I think people will appreciate that, because it's like when you merge two companies, it's the same thing. Both sides should have their processes documented, so then you can actually combine it together and know where to combine. And it's funny that yesterday I was interviewed on a podcast, and I actually used the example of apple pie, and I go like, okay, well, let's say you are combining two different companies, let's say two bakeries. One of them specializes in apple pie and another one in blueberry pie. And they have a way to do it. Well, how do you combine them? If they had their processes documented, then you can go, oh, okay. Well, you both use flour. This is the ingredients. Let's consolidate and use one vendor instead of two. This is how the production line will work. Let's maybe consolidate this, but maybe keep this separate. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, it makes it easier to evaluate the business when you have it documented.
Definitely. Such a great point, right? Like that is, kind of 2.0 to how you then evaluate the business, how you make things more efficient, because we are in a fraught economic climate right now, right? And if businesses are going to survive, they have to focus on how they're managing their costs, how they're doing things in the most cost-effective, efficient manner if they're going to survive, right? And it's so funny, I started the company right before COVID, and I thought that was the last, like, okay, if we survive COVID, then all of the things are going to just be smooth sailing, right? Now it's like, okay, the economy is also another factor here, right? And it's cyclical. So even if it's not now, at some point in time, through the duration of the company's life, you're going to have to face an economic downturn. You're going to have to figure out how you're able to navigate that, and being able to look at how we are doing things as a whole, then to figure out, okay, what can we do that's more efficient? How can we do this in a cheaper way? How can we do this in a better way? And looking at our margins for projects, right? How are we restructuring our contracts? One of the interesting things that came out of this exercise was the fact that one of the things that we needed to do was restructure the contracts that we were having with these larger brands. It just brings up so many different areas of your business that you just didn't even think were connected, but literally everything is interconnected. So I think that that's such an incredible point that you brought up. I also will say two other things that were kind of like learnings as a part of this process. The one thing is the people factor, right? So if somebody is used to doing things in their own way as they want to, and just kind of based on their experience, you are essentially, as an organization, undergoing a change. And you have to have a change management mindset so that people are open to this new process that you're rolling out. Because that then means that Jan isn't able to do things in a very different way than John, in a very different way than Jim. We are trying to align those processes. We're trying to create project plans, and people kind of want to continue doing things the way that they were doing it. So you have to deal with the psychological aspects and elements of how you're bringing people along in this. Then people are like, okay, well, why are you doing it? Are you trying to kind of like reevaluate my job? Are you trying to kind of download all of these things? So it's interesting, all of the kind of psychological things that you have to kind of deal with and navigate here as a part of that process.
You're absolutely right. That's why when we engage in those processes, we encounter that, right? When people ask me what are the obstacles we're going to run in documenting processes, that's one of them. It can be a resistance from the existing staff because they might feel threatened, or they might feel that they don't want to give the information, or they might not even want to think about how they do it because they just do it. So it's really always important to get the buy-in from each and every individual in the company and find their own why of how having well-documented processes and procedures will help them achieve their own goals. And if their goals are positive and they align with helping the company, it will work out, because they will see that it's not only they're not going to lose their job, they're going to get more job security because they are going to be able to produce better, faster, more efficient, etc.
Yes. And I found that the kind of pre-step to all of this was getting that internal buy-in, because what we're trying to do is essentially download everything that exists in somebody's brain. But if they're not bought into the process, then they're going to kind of give you, half the answer, or they're going to say, oh yeah, just do it to taste, right? Like within grandma's recipe. And it's like, okay, no, how do we really dig deeper here? And we found that kind of starting at that 30,000 foot level, and then kind of going down a layer and going down another layer, getting that buy-in with each layer that you kind of dig deeper into the process, has worked on our end to bring people along slowly versus kind of all at once.
Absolutely, yes. Well, Nia, you have been a wealth of information, and you definitely demonstrate, I mean, you are so competent and organized. And I mean, of course, you will have systems. That's why you're so successful. And that's honestly, that's why you can execute those projects successfully, because you communicate that competence, that high quality, that no compromise on the quality and the reputation and the final product. But you cannot have a disorderly house and create such products. It just doesn't work. It's kind of like, we'll go back to grandma's apple pie, or if you have a restaurant, if the kitchen is a mess, people are going to get sick. If you have, you have to have a spotless kitchen. You have to have everything organized so you can actually produce the food correctly on time, and it's healthy, and it is clean, and people will continue to come. But you have to have, it comes with organization. You can accomplish all of that with a mess, and you definitely demonstrate that. It's very, very you can see that from your communication, from all the stories that you share with us. So I'm sure our listeners want to know how they can contact you, either as an advisor or maybe that ask you questions. What's the best way to do that?
Definitely. You can reach out to me via email. It's nkr@immersive-strategies.com, or by visiting our website if you're interested in engaging with us at www.immersive-strategies.com.
And they can probably also find you on LinkedIn.
Definitely. Can definitely find me on LinkedIn as well.
And we'll include all of it in the show notes. So definitely look it up and go to their website. It's beautiful. If you want to see a really beautiful website, go to that website. Absolutely amazing.
Thank you. That means so much coming from you. I appreciate it.
You are very welcome. Well, thank you so much again for being a guest. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.